Throughout history, some of the most dangerous individuals ever to walk the earth have remained hidden in the shadows of public awareness. While the world fixates on infamous names like Al Capone or Ted Bundy, an entirely different roster of prisoners has carried out crimes so brutal and cunning that their stories seem almost unreal, yet most people have never heard of them. These inmates were not just murderers or thieves. They were masterminds of chaos who thrived even when locked behind bars. Their existence proves that evil does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it lurks quietly, waiting for the right moment to strike. The concept of a deadliest inmate often conjures images of heavily armed gang leaders or notorious serial killers. But many of the most dangerous prisoners in history were far more subtle, blending into the background while orchestrating violence that shook entire regions. Some came from war-torn countries where record-keeping was poor, allowing their crimes to fade into obscurity. Others were overshadowed by bigger news stories of their era, buried in yellowed archives or lost in translation across continents. Their anonymity wasn't the result of harmlessness. It was a testament to how efficiently they operated in darkness. Consider the prisons of the early 20th century, when security systems were primitive and guards were often poorly trained. A single inmate with charisma and a brilliant mind could manipulate staff, rally fellow convicts, and create networks that extended beyond the walls. These hidden predators understood human psychology better than most therapists. They exploited weaknesses in the system, whether bribing officials, forging alliances with rival gangs, or sending coded messages through seemingly innocent letters. While the world outside believed them neutralized, they were quietly pulling strings, setting up assassinations, and smuggling weapons as if the iron bars around them were nothing more than a thin inconvenience. Some of these prisoners were born into violence, molded by war or political upheaval. Civil conflicts and collapsing empires provided fertile ground for criminals who thrived on chaos. When finally captured, governments often chose secrecy over spectacle, fearing public panic or political fallout. Records were sealed, trials held behind closed doors, and names scrubbed from headlines. In other cases, remote prison colonies, whether on isolated islands or deep in the wilderness, kept these individuals out of sight and out of mind. What the public never knew was that these forgotten inmates frequently wielded more influence from their cells than many free men on the outside. Their stories challenge our understanding of justice and security. We like to believe that a prison sentence equals safety, that the worst people can be locked away and rendered harmless. Yet history reveals a more unsettling truth. The cell door does not always end the threat. Some prisoners continued to orchestrate crime empires, destabilize governments, or inspire deadly cults long after their convictions. Their ability to adapt, to turn confinement into a new arena for domination, makes them more dangerous than those who merely kill and are caught. Uncovering these hidden monsters is not just an exercise in morbid curiosity. It forces us to confront the limits of our own systems. How many such figures still remain nameless today, plotting behind reinforced walls while the world carries on, oblivious? As we move deeper into their stories, the chilling reality emerges. The deadliest inmates in human history were not always the ones splashed across front pages. Often they were the ones we never knew to fear, and that is precisely what made them so lethal. Inside the world's most fortified prisons, where thick stone walls and razor wire are meant to contain society's worst, some inmates transformed confinement into a stage for even darker acts. These prisoners were not just violent criminals. They were predators who thrived on control and chaos, their names mostly unknown beyond a few faded case files. Each one proved that a prison sentence can be a pause, not an end, to a reign of terror. Take the chilling case of Pedro Rodrigues Filho of Brazil, sometimes called the perfect prisoner killer. Convicted of dozens of murders, he was already infamous when he entered prison. but his deadliest work began behind bars. Instead of quietly serving his time, Rodriguez became an executioner of fellow inmates, claiming to kill only those he deemed evil: rapists, murderers, and even gang leaders who preyed on weaker prisoners. Authorities believe his total number of victims may exceed 100, many of whom died inside the very place designed to contain violence. Guards feared him. Rival gangs tried and failed to eliminate him, and his cold efficiency turned his cell block into a personal hunting ground. In the United States, Karl Panzram offers another unnerving example. A drifter and serial killer in the early 1900s, Panzram confessed to murders across multiple states and even foreign countries. When finally imprisoned, he showed no sign of remorse, openly declaring that he would kill again if given the chance. True to his word, he murdered a prison staff member with a metal bar, not out of desperation, but sheer hatred for humanity. His writings, a chilling autobiography of unrepentant evil, remain a reminder of how some men see confinement as nothing more than a different battlefield. Across the ocean, in Japan, Norio Nagayama's story reveals how a quiet demeanor can hide lethal intent. Convicted of multiple murders during a spree as a teenager, Nagayama maintained an eerie calm throughout his imprisonment. While awaiting execution, he gained a cult following for the novels he wrote from his cell, works that masked the cold brutality of his crimes. Guards described him as polite and introspective, but survivors of his attacks never forgot how calculated and merciless he had been. His ability to charm the public with literature while awaiting death showed that danger can wear the face of an artist as easily as a thug. Not all deadly inmates relied on their own hands. Some, like organized crime figure Dawood Ibrahim's associates in Indian prisons, continued to command vast criminal empires from within. Using bribery, coded phone calls, and corrupt intermediaries, they moved money, ordered hits, and kept entire neighborhoods in fear, proving that influence can be as deadly as a weapon. Despite heavy surveillance, their networks adapted faster than the authorities could tighten security. What unites these prisoners is a mindset that refuses containment. They turned steel doors and concrete walls into tools rather than barriers, finding new ways to dominate. Whether through calculated killings, psychological manipulation, or criminal entrepreneurship, they demonstrated that a true predator's reach does not stop at the prison gate. Their existence challenges the comforting notion that once a person is locked away, the threat is neutralized. These hidden figures force us to question the very concept of punishment. If a person can continue to kill or command power from behind bars, what does justice really mean? Their stories are not just cautionary tales from the past. They remain warnings for every society that believes a locked cell is the end of danger. The next chapters in this dark history show how even the most secure institutions can become breeding grounds for terror when such inmates find ways to bend the rules of confinement to their will. Even the strongest bars and the highest walls have never guaranteed control over the most determined inmates. History is littered with moments when dangerous prisoners turned confinement into an opportunity, not a limitation, using their cunning to escape, spark riots, and manipulate entire prison populations. These were not random bursts of chaos. They were carefully calculated moves by individuals who treated prison as a chessboard and every guard, fellow inmate, and weak spot in the infrastructure as a piece to be exploited. One of the most audacious examples came from Soviet Russia, where the cold, sprawling gulags were designed to break spirits as well as bodies. Yet notorious thief and murderer Vasily Ivanovich Komarov, who had already killed dozens before capture, repeatedly managed to slip away from custody. In one daring attempt, he used the very harsh environment to his advantage, disappearing into the Siberian wilderness during a work detail. Though eventually recaptured, his escapes revealed the terrifying truth that even in the harshest conditions, a patient, calculating mind could outsmart an entire system. In the United States, The saga of the 1980 New Mexico State Penitentiary riot underscores how power-hungry inmates can transform a prison into a battlefield. What began as a security lapse turned into a nightmarish takeover, with inmates seizing control of entire cell blocks, taking guards hostage, and inflicting brutal violence on rivals. Among the ringleaders were seasoned criminals who understood the power vacuum and exploited it, using the chaos to settle scores and assert dominance. By the time order was restored, 33 prisoners were dead, many tortured in scenes too horrific for official reports to fully describe. Investigations later showed that a few key inmates had planned the riot for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, demonstrating that patience and strategy can be as deadly as weapons. Across the Atlantic, in France, Jacques Mérine became legendary for escapes that seemed ripped from a thriller. Nicknamed the Man of 1,000 Faces, Mérine was a master of disguise and deception. He broke out of high-security facilities multiple times in the 1970s, often by manipulating guards and using smuggled weapons or fake IDs. His escapes embarrassed the French government and turned him into an anti-hero in some circles. But for authorities, he represented a living nightmare, a charismatic, violent criminal who refused to be caged and who delighted in taunting the very system meant to contain him. Power plays were not always about fleeing. Sometimes the most dangerous inmates stayed inside deliberately, ruling from within. Leaders of powerful prison gangs like the Mexican Mafia or the Aryan Brotherhood often chose not to escape because their influence was strongest behind bars. From their cells, they ordered murders on the outside, controlled drug trafficking routes, and dictated the fates of thousands. Prison for them became a headquarters, where coded messages and corrupt intermediaries allowed them to operate with astonishing reach. Guards became pawns, sometimes bribed or threatened into compliance, and rival gangs either bent the knee or faced deadly consequences. These stories reveal a common thread. True danger inside a prison is not only about brute strength or weapons. It's about intelligence, patience, and a relentless refusal to be powerless. Escapes, riots, and covert operations expose the uncomfortable reality that some inmates view confinement as merely another arena to test their skills. They exploit weak policies, overworked staff, and even public fascination with their exploits. Every successful riot or escape sends a message to society that the line between control and chaos is thinner than anyone wants to admit. And for the deadliest prisoners in human history, that thin line is exactly where they thrive, turning prisons, the very symbols of justice, into stages for their own terrifying displays of dominance. What drives a person to remain lethally dangerous even after the cell door slams shut? To understand the deadliest inmates, we have to look past their crimes and into the complex, often chilling psychology that defines them. These men and women are not merely violent out of impulse. They are master manipulators, calculating predators who treat prison as a stage for their own dark ambitions. Their minds reveal that danger is not just about physical brutality, but about an unshakable will to dominate, regardless of circumstance. Many of these inmates display traits of psychopathy, a cold lack of empathy, a grandiose sense of self-worth, and a willingness to manipulate without remorse. Psychologists who have interviewed such prisoners often describe an eerie calm, as though they are observing the world through a pane of glass rather than participating in it. They can mimic normal emotions when it benefits them, fooling guards, therapists, and fellow inmates into believing they have changed. But beneath the surface is a calculated detachment that allows them to plan violence as casually as others plan a meal. It is this ability to charm and deceive that makes them so dangerous, because a smiling predator is harder to spot than a raging one. Some arrive in prison already hardened by environments that rewarded cruelty. Childhood abuse, exposure to war, and early criminal networks can train a person to see violence as currency. In these cases, prison may even feel familiar, a rigid hierarchy where strength and intimidation earn respect. Instead of breaking their spirit, incarceration validates their worldview. They adapt quickly, forming alliances, identifying weak guards, and using every resource at their disposal to climb the internal power ladder. For them, prison is not a punishment, but a new ecosystem to conquer. Others, however, are driven less by background and more by ideology or obsession. Political extremists or cult leaders who find themselves imprisoned can remain lethal because their cause gives them purpose. They view confinement as a setback, not a defeat, and often use their charisma to recruit new followers inside. Their sense of mission can inspire riots, orchestrate violence against rivals, or even spread their influence to the outside world. The prison cell becomes a pulpit from which they continue to preach and sometimes command bloodshed without ever touching a weapon. Researchers also point to the intoxicating effect of power. For certain inmates, the act of controlling others is as addictive as any drug. They thrive on watching guards flinch, on making fellow prisoners obey, on bending the institution to their will. This hunger for dominance does not diminish with time. In fact, the restrictions of prison may intensify it. Deprived of ordinary freedoms, they channel all their energy into schemes that prove they are still in charge, whether through orchestrating violence, running criminal operations, or manipulating the media to craft a legend around their name. Perhaps most unsettling is how easily these psychological forces can combine. A prisoner with psychopathic traits, a violent upbringing, and a thirst for power can become an unstoppable force within the walls meant to contain them. They may never raise their voice or brandish a weapon, yet they inspire fear that permeates every corridor. Guards speak of a palpable tension around such individuals, a sense that something could happen at any moment, and that the inmate is always 3 steps ahead. The psychology of pure danger reminds us that prisons are not laboratories where behavior can be neatly controlled. They are volatile ecosystems where the most ruthless minds find new ways to thrive. These inmates teach a sobering lesson. True menace is not merely physical but mental, a relentless drive that survives isolation, surveillance, and time. Understanding them is not just about cataloging their crimes. It is about recognizing that some people see confinement not as an end, but as the ultimate challenge, a place to prove that nothing, not even iron bars, can contain their will to dominate. The stories of history's deadliest inmates do not end with their deaths or the clang of a cell door. Their legacies echo through modern justice systems, shaping how prisons are built, how inmates are monitored, and how societies think about crime and punishment. Each case becomes more than a dark tale. It becomes a warning that forces governments and citizens alike to confront the uncomfortable truth that danger can endure long after a conviction. One of the most immediate impacts has been the evolution of prison security. Repeated escapes and violent uprisings pushed nations to design facilities that are less like traditional jails and more like fortified fortresses. Supermax prisons emerged in the United States after incidents such as the New Mexico riot and the brutal attacks carried out by inmates like Karl Panzram and his successors. These high-tech compounds rely on electronic surveillance, motion sensors, and near-total isolation to prevent even the smallest opportunity for violence or escape. Similar ultra-secure units appeared in Europe, Asia, and South America, each one a direct response to the realization that some individuals cannot be contained by conventional means. Their influence reaches beyond architecture. The psychological profiles of these inmates have driven research in criminology and mental health, prompting deeper studies into psychopathy, sociopathy, and the effects of early trauma. Programs for evaluating high-risk prisoners now include more rigorous assessments of manipulative behavior, charisma, and leadership potential, traits that once allowed dangerous inmates to exploit prison systems. Risk assessment tools and behavioral monitoring protocols were sharpened in part because of the havoc wrought by these men and women. Each chilling case became data, informing how future threats are identified before tragedy strikes. The cultural impact is equally significant. Films, books, and documentaries about prison escapes or notorious riots often draw on the exploits of these hidden predators. While sensationalized media can sometimes glamorize criminals, it also keeps the public aware of the delicate balance between safety and chaos within prison walls. Their stories challenge audiences to rethink simplistic notions of justice, showing that punishment is not just about locking someone away, but also about ensuring they cannot continue to harm society from within. The fascination with figures like Jacques Mazerin or Pedro Rodriguez Filho reflects a deeper question. Why do we remain captivated by those who refuse to be controlled, even when we fear them? Perhaps the most sobering legacy is the ongoing debate about rehabilitation versus containment. The deadliest inmates highlight the limits of reform. For some individuals, no therapy, education program, or second chance will erase the relentless drive to dominate or kill. This forces societies to wrestle with moral dilemmas. When is permanent isolation justified? How do we protect human rights while safeguarding the public from those who exploit every kindness as a weakness? Governments and legal scholars continue to grapple with these questions, and their answers are often informed by the grim precedents set by the prisoners who turned confinement into a new form of power. Even today, their shadow lingers. Modern gang leaders run global networks from behind bars using encrypted phones and corrupt intermediaries, echoing the strategies of past masterminds. Extremist ideologues use prison time to recruit and radicalize, just as earlier figures once preached violence through coded letters and clandestine meetings. Technology changes, but the essence of the threat remains the same. A small number of individuals possess the intelligence, patience, and ruthlessness to make a mockery of walls, guards, and surveillance. Ultimately, the legacy of these inmates is a hard lesson in humility. We like to believe that society can control its most dangerous members with enough concrete, steel, and cameras, yet history proves otherwise. Their lives remind us that vigilance can never rest, that security must evolve, and that evil can adapt as quickly as any innovation meant to contain it. In the end, the deadliest prisoners teach us not only about crime, but about ourselves, about the fragile line between order and chaos, and the endless effort required to keep that line from breaking.